Good afternoon and welcome to this Lunch and Learn regarding productivity in construction and waste. So thank you very much for joining us today. This Lunch and Learn is brought to you in partnership with the Supply Chain Sustainability School and LC International. And my name is Brett Blake and I'll be facilitating this session for you today. So what are we going to go through today? We're going to look at a welcome and introductions. We're going to look at the introduction to the learning pathway. And this is a learning pathway that forms part of the journey that you can take looking at the productivity in construction and waste. And this is one of 8 learning pathways. And I'll share a little bit more detail about that later on. We're going to spend some time looking at waste and identifying waste, and then steps we can take to reduce waste. And then finally, we'll look at what we can do about this to improve productivity in construction, and then open up some questions and answers at the end. So this Lunch and Learn will aim to explain the 3 types of work we have and we consider within lean thinking, which is value adding, supporting value adding, and waste. And this Lunch and Learn will also introduce you to the productivity in construction and waste learning pathway, which is delivered by myself in conjunction with the Supply Chain Sustainability School. So today we're going to be using the Miro platform, which I'm sharing via the Zoom call at this moment. And if you go into the Zoom chat, you'll be able to see a link for you to access this board, and that will give you all access to the interactivity and give you the ability to share your thoughts via post-it notes. So let me just share with you how this works then. So how to use this board once you've linked into it and you've followed the link on Zoom. If you want to add some information, all you need to do is select the sticky note towards the left-hand side of the screen. And once you've picked your sticky note, you can identify which colour you would like to use and then place this somewhere on the screen. Once you've done this, you can then type in your message or your thought you'd like to share with everybody else on the call, just as I've done so there. So please feel free just to spend a couple of minutes having a look at adding your own post-it notes into the area here where it says have a go. So this session today is using the Miro platform, and this is just like having a whiteboard in a room with you. As you can see, it can be accessed by multiple people all at the same time. So it's an excellent source, an excellent opportunity to brainstorm together. And as we go through this workshop today, there's going to be opportunity for you to share your thoughts around the frustrations, opportunities you see at work, and also some of the key things that you want to take away from today's session. So thank you very much for having a practice at adding your post-it notes there. So without further ado, I'd like to just continue through this Miro canvas. So let's introduce you to the learning pathway. So the learning pathway that we're focusing on today is productivity in construction and waste. And this pathway is built up of 4 key elements. The first one today is the Lunch and Learn. And this will last about an hour, just giving you an overview of what we mean by productivity in construction and waste, and also an insight to what this learning pathway will be formed of. After this Lunch and Learn, you will have an opportunity to sign up to the learning pathway. And my colleague from the Supply Chain Sustainability School will send out links and emails to yourself after this call so that you can take up that opportunity. So the next stage will be the e-learning modules. And these can be found on the Supply Chain Sustainability School's website. And this gives you an opportunity to look at one of 8 of the e-learning modules, understand a little bit more about what lean thinking is in construction. And this is our foundation for you to then enter into what we call our Workshop Initiate. Now, the Workshop Initiate is a 3-hour workshop that starts to explore what this learning pathway is all about and how you can take this learning and put it into practice within your own business areas. There'll be some preparation required. We'll ask you to go and do what we call a go, look and see, to deeply understand some of the issues you're facing and then bring that evidence into that workshop so we can work through it together to see how we can improve that situation for you. The 4th element is what we call a check and continue. And this is the opportunity for us to come back together again to review what actions you've taken, how they went, what worked well and what didn't go well, and what we can focus on next time and help you deliver improvement into the future. And there'll be a coaching opportunity as part of that Check and Continue workshop. So we'll give you more details towards the end of this Lunch and Learn around how to get involved with this learning pathway and the other 8 learning pathways that there are. Okay then. So this Lunch and Learn is all about identifying waste. And within lean thinking, our main focus is about waste removal. Now, we don't mean waste as in the rubbish that's lying around or packaging that we see. What we see waste as is the things that we do that the customer isn't prepared to pay for, or our end client isn't prepared to pay for. We see waste as things that are taking us away from what is important, the task in hand. So think about your day-to-day activities, whether it be on a construction site, maybe laying bricks, or whether you're a crane operator and you're moving product from one area to another. Or if you're working in a support function, whether it be in finance or planning or estimating, think about what it is you need to do to perform your task. And then think about how often you get taken away from that task, interrupted, or when things don't work well. And we categorize this waste into value adding, non-value adding, and waste. So what is value adding? Well, value adding are the things that we do. The value adding probably makes up of about 5% of all we do in a given working day. Because the other 95% is built up of what we call non-value adding tasks, things that we have to do to deliver a service or deliver that project on time. However, it doesn't form part of the budgets that we've put in or what our customer or client is prepared to pay for. Think about inductions that we give to new supply chain partners or new people joining our business. It's a necessity. We have to do it to get people on board into the business. However, it can't be budgeted for. We can't really pass on that charge or cost to our customer or client. And then waste. This is everything that happens that takes us away from what's important. And you'll see waste in everything that you do, whether it be at work or as you go about your normal life. And I like to use an example here around a hotel. We've all stopped in hotels over the years. What's it like to book in to that hotel? What's it like to check in on the day that you arrive at that hotel? Do you have to wait in a queue, for example? What are the staff doing as you're waiting in the queue? Are they dealing with people in an efficient way? Or are they having problems with maybe paperwork, or their systems are slowing that movement of people now? And if we're seeing these challenges, that's where the non-value adding waste start to appear. So think about your own processes. Think about what you plan to do on a day-to-day basis. And do you ever do a check back to see what you plan to do? Did it actually happen? So when we think about identifying waste, and when we start to think about making improvement with lean thinking in mind, it's all about stopping the things that happen that take us away from the task in hand. Our focus is about removing that non-value adding and waste, which gives us more time to focus on the important things. So I just want to open up to yourself now for you to start to share some of your examples around what do you see around you, around value adding, non-value adding, and waste. And please feel free to add your post-it notes into this area. And what we'll do is, as you start to add your post-it notes up, we'll explore the examples that you're giving and go into a little bit more detail about what they look like. So again, for those of you that do access the Miro board, please feel free to select a post-it note from the left-hand side, identify the colour you'd like to use, and place it where you'd like to type your information. And then you can move that post-it note around very easily to where you want to place it on the board. So what have we got so far? We've got somebody putting value add in there, delivery paperwork, booking couriers. So these are things that we have to do. We have to move that information around. But how do we move that information around in the most efficient way? Can that paperwork be digitized, for example, so that we don't have to move paperwork around anymore? It can be accessed by all people at all times if they have the link. Writing commissioned reports, absolutely. So that could be a value-adding activity. But the challenge I have there is, how many times do we have to make amendments to that commissioned report before it can be published? So the value-adding activity may be writing the commissioned report. However, how many changes do we have to make before it's right to publish? How many times do we have to check the information to ensure that it is correct, that the wording is correct? We've got a training and upskilling there, value-adding. Now that could be a challenge. It could be value-adding, or it could be non-value-adding as well, dependent on what value it's adding to the project or the business itself. Now, if it's training and upskilling for the first time to give people that expertise, perfect, value-adding. But if it's because people didn't really understand that training in the first instance, and we have to give it them again, that might be seen as non-value-adding, because how have we not understood what the information is and what information is required to ensure people have the right training and skills up front? We've got there meetings for meeting's sake. Now, is that really value-adding? No, good, that's been moved out, excellent. So efficient use of combining meetings, for sure. So think about what it is that you're coming together for. Do you have an agreed agenda? At the end of each meeting, do you check to ensure what you plan to do has actually happened? And if that's the case, that is a value-adding activity. If you find that you haven't discussed what you're expecting, or other things have come in place, then that could take you into a non-value-adding area where you need to take some action. So let's start looking at some of the non-value-adding activities you've got in there. Same reports every day. So when I look at reports, I tend to think about, what's the report for? What's our focus within our business? Is it looking back and seeing what has happened, or is it looking forward to challenge what we need to do differently? So if that report is helping us to challenge that thinking of looking forward, there's some value in there. However, we need to ensure that we're taking action. We've got admin work that is required, but doesn't add value, essential, but non-value adding. So think about the administration that you do. Think about the checking, the inputting. How do we get information to where we need it in the simplest way, the easiest way? Is there anything we can do that's automated, for example? A good one is some of the checking that we do on site around quality. Now, is quality value adding or non-value adding, you may ask? Now, it may be value adding from a point that the customer is wanting to purchase a service or a product or see that finished building right first time. So we've got to ensure that quality. But think about all of the tasks associated with that quality. So let's now look at waste. So let's think about waste, waiting for someone to finish a task before it's able to proceed. So how are you ensuring that the right information is being passed on to other people so that they can pass that information on in the right way? Think about what standards you have in place around those handovers. You've got defective work there. Think about what standards you have to have in place to ensure that defective work is reduced. So these are some really good examples there of waste that we see. But we now see around what we do that's value adding, what we see that's non-value adding we need to take action, and then the waste that we need to remove. So let's think about the steps that we take to reduce this waste. So if it's value adding, think about how you can continue doing it in the same consistent way, and how you can share that best practice with other people within the business so they're all following the same way of working. Think about, do you have any standard apps that you can share? Is there ways that you deal with actions that can be replicated by other members of the team. But have some sort of check in place so that we can ensure that what we're doing is still adding the correct value, so we can continue to improve that cycle. And that improvement will then need to be shared with the rest of the team so that we're all working that same new way. If it's non-value added, think about why. Why is it non-value added? And think about how do we identify some of the things that we do that don't truly add value to the processes that we're working on. And think about how do we categorize them. I'm going to look at some of those categories shortly. And with the non-value added, think about how do we reduce that further in the future. And that may be with workshops, maybe problem solving activities around what is it that's taking us away from that task in hand. And like with the value added activities, think about how you improve that situation. And then with waste, think why it's waste. And again, we'll look at the identification and characterization with that in a minute. But think about how do we eliminate that waste that takes us away, whether it be things that we've not got right first time, or whether it be some of the things around duplication or interruptions that we have. And once we've removed that waste, think about what checks we need to have in place to ensure that waste doesn't creep back in again. So what I want us to think about now is, what frustrations do you currently have? And what opportunities do you currently see out there within your working lives? Do you think, if we could just do one thing different, that would improve my situation? But I'm really not sure how to share this with other people in the team. And we'll start to explore that shortly in the next phase. So let's think about your frustrations and opportunities that you have. And I always think about this in a frustration. If we can remove a frustration each day and make each day 1% better than it was yesterday, that's improvement through marginal gains. That's incremental improvement. So we might not be able to solve the whole problem today, but we may be able to make those small steps to improvement to get rid of that issue altogether over a period of time. I tend to sow seeds with people and say, what do you think about what's happening now? Are you happy with the situation? What worked well? What didn't go well? What would you do differently? And just open questions like this gets people to think about, well, I'm not going to be satisfied with the status quo that we're in. So we've got one on there around silo mentality. So how are you working with your teams that are passing information or work to you, or information and work that you pass to another team? An example I have here around silo mentality is in a call centre. So I used to work with a team in a call centre for the NHS, and they were dealing with all of the complaints from the poor supply of materials in hospitals. And we spoke with the customer complaints team and said, okay, then what are you doing to improve that? And most of their time was all focused on trying to put the customer at ease. We actually just said to them, why don't you talk to the processing teams, the ones that are doing the invoicing and the delivery of those materials? And it's something they've not done before, but within 20 minutes of those teams coming together, those silos were broken down and improvements started to happen. And the customer services team dealing with the complaints then had a hardwired line to the processing team and kept them updated on the situation so they could actually improve those processes day by day. So think about how you're breaking down those barriers between the different teams that you have. Stakeholder engagement is a great opportunity. You may have come across a process called RACI. RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So think about how you pass and share information, who is responsible for that and who is accountable for that information, who needs the information at the right time to ensure that frustrations are dealt with. Reviewing current processes, identify waste on varied activities and remove it. So think about, what is the proportion of your day spent on doing tasks? And what is your proportion of your day on looking forward to improve some of the things that you're faced with that haven't worked too well? And how can you break down your day so that you can focus some of that day on improving the current situation? Think about the excessive administration that you have. Think about what does that look like? Think about when you're processing information, how many screens or apps do you have open on your computer at any one time? How often are you having to copy and paste information? How often are you having to update information because it was sent to you incorrectly? So think about all of these challenges that we're seeing here. So how do we make a difference? How are we going to use these frustrations and opportunities and do something differently? So I mentioned earlier on around categorization. And there's a number of ways we can categorize. But today I'm going to take you through something called Tim Wood. And this is looking at the 7/8 wastes around Tim Wood. So how do we identify wastes? Well, the first thing I'd like to share with you is a principle we call go, look and see. And go, look and see is about getting out into your workplace and taking a step back and just observing what's currently happening. Observe the process, observe your colleagues, and understand what is it that's actually happening. If you're working on a construction site, a go, look, see could be held around the cranes and hoists, for example, and the material flowing to site. Think about how quickly a vehicle can get into your site. Think about how easy it is for the hoist to pick that material up and move it to the point of use that it's going to be used in. Think about how much backlog there is, an inventory that's in the way, so things have to be moved a number of times before it's actually at the place of work. So think about when you do your go, look, see what is working well, what is not working so well, and what's causing us frustrations. And part of that go, look, see is about talking to people that are performing those tasks. The ones that are probably immersed so much in their job that they never take the opportunity to take a step back and think about what can I do differently. And through that discussion, that go, look, see, you can start to seek out potential opportunities. Now, the Tim Woods is all about categorization. So we can focus on a number of these things that you spot, categorized in one way, so we can take action across one whole grouping of waste. So what are those 8 wastes that we have there? So in the 8 wastes, we focus on transportation, inventory, movement, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, and defects. So what do we mean by transportation? And what is the waste of transportation? So this is unnecessary movement of parts or machines or materials. Think about what it is you need to perform that task or deliver that project. And do you have those materials around you? Are you able to easily access them without having to go and look for them? Think about the equipment that you use. Is it serviceable? Is it in the place where you last left it? And if the answer to these questions is no, there's a waste of transportation that we need to deal with. Inventory, that's focusing now on thinking around what materials do I actually need for the job that I'm doing. So if I'm, for example, doing some wiring within a flat in a residential property, how much cabling do I actually need? How many plugs and sockets do I actually need to perform that task? And can I go to the point of where the work is being taken place with the right information and inventory at the right time to do that task without having to seek out and look for more materials to use? Think about your movement on site, your movement in and out of that site. How close are the refreshment areas to where you're working, for example? Where you clock in and out from a health and safety perspective and where the work is actually taking place. How long does it take for you to get from one place to another to do your task? And can we streamline that? Are the lifts within a construction site being used for material movement as well as people movement? And if that's the case, do we find that we get to where we're doing the job and the materials aren't there yet? Or the materials are there, but the people can't get to that job? That in itself can cause waiting. So think about then the waiting around you being able to do your task? Do you have the right materials around? Do you have the right information to perform that task? Was the quality sign-off completed before you could start your part of the task? Have you been through your induction yet onto site? And has that induction been giving you the ability to be able to start working? So think about that waiting between the different process steps we have when delivering something, and what that waiting looks like and how we can remove that. Overproduction is all about, do we have the right materials delivered to us at the right time? Or do we have more than required? And if you're overproducing on one thing, the chances are you're underproducing on the things that you need. Think about what that overproduction does and how it affects some of these other wastes. So if you've got overproduction, you've got more materials, equipment, and inventory that you've then got to deal with, that you've got to move around more because it might not be stored in a place that's required. It could in itself create over-processing. So if you've got too much inventory, the chances are you're having to spend more time booking in and booking out of systems. You're having to do more checks to ensure you've got the right stock on hand and it's in the right place. If you've got overproduction and you've got too many materials around you, the chances are that in itself can cause defects, because things get damaged when they're just sat around waiting to be used. If you've produced more than required and something was wrong, that in itself could create defects that you've not noticed, so you've produced things wrong. So think about what that overproduction looks like within your areas of work. And then finally, defects. Do we get the opportunity to do things right first time? Do we have the right information around us, the right standards that we're working to, the right designs that allow us to build what we need to build right first time? So think about these 8 wastes when you're looking and going out and doing your go, look, see. Because these are where our frustrations lie. These are the things that start to cause the construction industry extra cost. And here I've given you a couple of examples of some observation sheets that you can use. And please feel free after this session to take a copy of this Miro board and use these for yourself. And we've got an observation sheet here that's looking around those classic wastes of tin woods. And you can use this to say, where are I seeing wastes on my site or the things that I'm working on? And what actions can I take to improve that? Now, a number of you on the call today on this workshop may not work with a physical process. So I've added here an example of what we call a service waste observation sheet. So things around what take you away from your tasks and stop you from doing what you believe is the right thing. Is it a delay, waiting for information? Is it unnecessary movement? So how many times are you having to move around different screens or applications on your computer or systems just to get the right information? How often are you having to duplicate effort? So inputting information into one report in one area and then having to duplicate that effort somewhere else into another report for somebody else. How often are you having to put errors right that maybe other people in your team haven't got quite right the first time? Or through a copy and paste function, it's not really copy and pasted the information in the right format. So you've then got to redo that format for that document that you're using. Think about the inventory that you have if you're a supporting function. So how many invoices are you having to process, for example? And is that having an impact on the materials that are being supplied to site that are going to be used? Do we have the right number of people dealing with those invoices or the ordering process to get the materials on site? And then think about any opportunities, things that come across your desk that you think, if I could just do this in a different way, but you don't get the opportunity, or you get feedback from a client or a customer and you're not able to act upon that to improve the situation for them in the future. That's an opportunity lost. And then finally, unclear information or communication. How often do we not get the right information passed through to us for us to take action on? And this is a good way of identifying your wastes and understanding, well, what can we do about this? However, our challenge when we start to think about the waste and things that we need to improve is making sure that we have an overall impact on the end-to-end of our processes. Because what we don't want to do is improve one area and then pass that waste on to another process within the business. So an example here is around value stream mapping. And value stream mapping is just a different way of mapping out your processes that you work through to deliver what's expected. So mapping is all about identifying those process steps and getting the people in the room with you to actually map out what they do and talk with you to understand what the handoff processes are between one process step and another. And you can use value stream mapping to actually start to capture your wastes and opportunities so that you can take action. And within a value stream map, once you've identified these opportunities and wastes, you can actually start to then agree within a team of where we should start first to make those improvements happen. So value stream mapping is an excellent way of pulling your teams together after they've conducted a go, look, see and identified the waste that they need to work on. Value stream mapping is an excellent way of gathering all of those thoughts together and agreeing as a team what actions to take first. So then, we've identified our wastes and we've understood our frustrations and opportunities we'd like to take forward. But we've now got to think about how do we put this into action? So our wastes and opportunities will be the things that cause that productivity gap, that gap in performance of where we want to be and where we actually are, whether it be increased costs through things not being done right first time, whether it be the delivery of our project or the piece of work is running late because we didn't have the right information. Or it could be that the quality of the information or the previous work wasn't up to scratch, so it had to be redone. All of these things affect productivity. So we've got to think about how do we take action now? So the way of taking action is agreeing where to start. It's about thinking around what is it that's causing this productivity to dip? And through that 7 ways, some value stream mapping, think about as a team what actions you're going to take. Think about how you're going to capture those actions, what it is that you're going to be working on and when, and who's going to be involved. And one of the post-it notes early on spoke about stakeholder management. This is where it's really key from the delivering of actions and improving that productivity. Make sure you've got the right people in the room that have the influence and have the appetite and the time to be able to take action to improve. So our focus is all about removal of waste, because if you remove that waste, it gives you more time to do the things that add that value. Now, capturing value. There are a number of ways of capturing that value, and what I'm showing you here now is what we call standard work. So once you've understood the actions you're going to take, think about how you're capturing that way of working so that other people can learn from that way of working. And we have a standard way that is always going to give us that right quality, that right delivery and that right cost. Now, these are traditional ways of capturing information, whether it be in a process chart or diagram, or a standard operating procedure that captures the main key steps that we need to work on to deliver what's expected. It could be a risk assessment or method statement that you use to ensure that your supply chain partners and the people that you work with know what has to be completed. But standard work is all about capturing those key steps, how long those key steps take, and then what do those key steps actually look like? And by the very nature of capturing standard work and working to that standard work, we can then start to measure how effective our productivity is and use this as a foundation for improvement in the future. Now, I've got a couple of examples here. I'm not going to play these videos today, but please feel free to play these videos by clicking the links that you see in the top right-hand corner in the future. And you'll have access to this Miro board after this workshop has ended today. So think about standard work, not just as a written document. Think about it potentially using technology or the media that we have around us, whether it be a YouTube video or whether it be using a system. An example I've got on here is a system called Augmenteer. And that's just a digital online version of capturing known standards, ways of working that can be accessible by PC, tablet or phone, anywhere on site that's got connectivity. And think about how you can ensure people work to these standards by doing a check act. So one method also of improving productivity is thinking about, what do we measure? Typically, whatever gets measured gets improved. So think about the measures that you currently have on site. And I've got some very simple examples of some metric charts and some run charts here around how things have been processing over different phases of a build, for example, and how it's improved over time through the removal of waste, through the removal of those frustrations by the working to standard. And you can measure things like how long it takes to do a task. Has that improved? What's the lead time to deliver? What are the total costs encountered? And what's the right first time? And how are all these affecting the productivity? We talked about an action plan earlier on. And it's looking at these run charts and thinking, where are the issues and the gaps that we need to focus on? And we can use a process around capturing where those issues and those gaps are. And we can use a simple process called Pareto. And Pareto is our opportunity of capturing the top 3 or 4 instances of issues that we need to take action on. And we can use those categorizations from the 7 wastes that we have, so we can start to identify with what we should focus on first. And I've broken down our analysis here into what we call 3 levels. And the first level is really there, just giving an example of focusing on quality. Where are we getting it right first time? Where are we not getting it right first time? And that takes us on to level 2, which breaks down then, okay, what were the instances that we were seeing where we were not getting it right first time? And we're starting to see in this simple example that the 2 top issues that we're seeing there is around the wiring and maybe some of the construction of the walls we have within that project. But that might not be enough detail to take action to improve the quality. And this is where you'd move to, say, example of level 3. This is where you start to break down, well, what do those top issues actually look like as instances around types as opposed to groupings? And when you break it down into this detail, you can then start to take action. So our focus today has been about thinking around, what is the waste that you're seeing on site? Where do you see value adding, non-value adding and wasteful tasks? And then what actions we're going to take through the categorization of those wastes, because through categorization of those wastes, we can then start to group them and have a larger effect on the improvements that we make. Our Go Look See is all about getting closer to the issues, and think about how often you take the opportunity to take a step back and have a look at what your processes are doing. How effective are those processes? Are you able to do what is required right first time? Maybe do a Go Look See of some of your colleagues, or pick specific places on your site to stand and just observe. It may be the movement of materials or people that you're looking at to see how you can better improve that and make that more efficient. It may be looking at some of the processes around invoicing, or maybe some of the design processes and the steps that you go through around your design process and getting those designs signed off ready for construction. Think about what those steps look like, how effective they are, and have that discussion with your team following your Go Look See to understand where those wastes are. But don't forget, bring that team together and think about how do we capture those wastes across the end-to-end process, because I wouldn't want you to fall into the trap of improving one area that then has a negative effect, the waste being passed on to another area. And then finally, think about the actions you're going to take and how you improve the standards within your business to ensure that the actions that you take are captured, understood, and then the improvements shared with all within the business. And again, improving productivity in one area will have no effect if it doesn't improve productivity across the whole business or the process that you're looking at. So what I'd like to do now is just spend the last 10 or 15 minutes thinking about what we've gone through today. And I'm open to answer any questions you may have around productivity in construction and the 7 wastes that we're looking at, or any questions that you may have around how we will dig deeper into the workshops that we'll hold over the coming weeks and months around this subject. So please feel free to capture your note, add it to the questions, answers, and just type your question in there. Any questions that are asked on here in this area, I will ensure that there's an answer put onto this board following this session so that you all have this for future reference that you can share with your teams. For those of you that don't have access to the Miro board and you're just following me via the Zoom call, please feel free to type your question into the Zoom chat and my colleague will pass that question into the board. So our first question there then, how to identify waste in the process is not very clear. It's a very, very good question. So the first thing I would do is within your process is write down the key steps to your process. What are the 3 or 4 things that you do that you believe will deliver that process? And then start to capture the things that take you away from that process itself. So for example, if I'm going to do some processing of an invoice, for example, I receive that invoice. Is the right information there on the invoice, or is it in the format that can be read by a scanning machine that we have? Or do we have to manipulate that information in one way? So that manipulation, that changing of the information received could be a waste. We may have to speak to the supplier of that invoice to understand what it is we have to do to change how they give us that information so it can be processed in a more improved way. If your process is around maybe an induction process, for example, do you understand the people that are joining that induction? Do you have the right information about the people and their experience joining that induction? Do we have the information that can be shared with them ready right first time? Do we know where the induction's taking place? What time it's taking place? And for all of these questions that I ask myself, I think to myself, what action do I have to do over and above that process? And that's typically where the waste lies. Are there any other questions that are coming from the team this morning? So we've got one here from Andy. So how can we get early buy-in from main contractors? Hard for them to see benefit of collaborative planning and benefits to bring versus cost. So I always ask the question there of the what's in it for me. So to get early buy-in, it's understanding what frustrations are they currently facing. and tapping into what is it that's causing them that frustration. Is it the fact that they never get to complete the job on time, so that they miss going on to the next job? They miss the opportunity of doing more work and bringing in more revenue for their contractor. Do we think about sharing some of the training that's available on Supply Chain Sustainability School and saying, you know, just have a look at some of this e-learning that's available around lean thinking and get them to challenge themselves around where their wastes are and what's causing them their frustration? Can we ask them around what their current performance is around quality and cost and delivery, and understand what actions they're taking and how they can work then from the main contractors to say, how do they work together across that supply chain? Because I'm seeing, having experiences and seeing evidence from not just the main contractor that's seeing challenges from the supply chain buying in, but I'm also seeing challenges from the main contractor, from the subcontractors, where the main contractor's not buying in. We're going to think about how do we open up that dialogue right from the very start and understand what's causing us frustration across the team, and having that open discussion, that fair discussion around those challenges are, where those challenges are. So what are the tools that can be used to help with reviewing processes to be more lean? So I see somebody's put SIPOC there. So SIPOC stands for Supplier Input Process, Outputs and Customer. But by the very nature of calling it SIPOC, we're looking at the supplier first. And should our focus really be on the customer first? What's the customer expecting from the processes or from the construction that we're delivering to them? So I change that SIPOC around and call it COPIS. So we have the COPIS version of this, where we put the customer first. We understand what they're expecting as an output from the processes that we're delivering. And then we then start to look at the inputs that our suppliers are giving us to ensure that we're giving that value to the customer. So we've got the SIPOC, but that links very nicely to another tool we call Voice of Customer. So what is it the customer really wants? And how do we as contractors and supply chain partners turn that want and understand what the real need is? Because if we understand what the need of the customer is, we can then start to put a measure around that. A measure, what does that need look like with respect to quality, for example? The cost that's associated with the delivery of what we're giving them. And then finally, what does that timeline look like? What are the other things that we can measure around the customer? Is it around how we keep them communicated and how we share information with them? How do we bring them onto site and actually show them how we're working? Is that something that they value? They want to actually see progress day by day. So think about, and I'll add a little bit more information to this question after this call that you can reference at the end of the webinar. We've got there, is there a recommended interval to run identification by project, by program? And I would say yes. And the lower the interval or the shorter the interval is, the more chance you have of taking action where there's gaps. So typically in construction, you may have weekly or monthly meetings reviewing what has gone on, what your percentage plan complete may be, for example. And if you're only reviewing that weekly or monthly, you can only take action to improve weekly or monthly. And if I take an example from automotive, their interval to take action can be as little as minutes. So if they're making automotives, if they're making cars down an automotive line, they're making a car, a finished car, maybe once every 1 or 2 minutes. So they've got to take action every 1 to 2 minutes if there is a problem, or they'll have a line stoppage. So think about what that looks like in construction. What is your realistic interval to take action? Now, it may be that the interval around your hoists and cranes has to be a shorter interval because that's the bottleneck on your site. And if you don't deal with that hoist or crane immediately when you see an instance or an issue, it will stop your site from working, because the materials and the equipment won't be where you need them. So I would say always start to challenge around the interval to the shortest interval that's realistic, that's reasonably possible within your construction site. So if you're currently looking at things weekly, how can we get that to twice weekly? How do we get people within that construction site, whether it be your supply chain partners or the contractors that you're working with, how do we get them to understand how often they do a check act around the things that they've planned to do? So is there a baseline when measuring how lean something is? What are we measuring against? Or is it a continuous review and improvement? So this is a really good question. So we talk about the non-value adding, value adding and waste. And all I would do here as a baseline and a benchmark is ask your people on a day-by-day basis, what did they plan to do and what actually happened? And that is a first good starting point around, have they delivered what they were expecting to deliver? The next question is, how often did they get taken off that task? How often did they have to look for equipment or materials? How often did they have to do something to a previous process step because what they're working on wasn't right, given to them right first time? And then that starts to form the non-value adding and waste. And we do a check then, a sense check around how much time is spent doing value added activities and how much time is spent taking them away from those value added activities. And that's where we can start to put a measure of time or cost that's lost around where those wastes are. So think about what that benchmark looks for your site itself. We could say that typically most businesses will have probably only 5% of the things that they do are really value adding. And the rest of it, the 95%, is actually either non-value adding or waste. But think about what that looks like in your own processes. And you can only do that by doing that current measure yourself about what it is you do and what's taking you away from that task in hand or what you plan to achieve. Are there any other questions that anybody would like to ask before we come to the end of this webinar today? Okay then, so while we're just waiting for any more questions to come on there, what I'd like to do is just share with you now the feedback process that we have. So this is one of a number of webinars that we hold that's focusing on the lean thinking. And this links into the learning pathways that we have that take you into some workshops we'll be holding that starts to challenge in a little bit more detail what actions you can take. So please feel free to click the link that you see there in the text format, or to the right hand corner of the feedback form itself you can click the link. Also, my colleagues from the Supply Chain Sustainability School also put this link into the chat on Zoom. So please feel free to click the link, and by clicking the link that will take you through to the feedback form. And there are just a number of questions on there that we'd like to just for you to spend a few minutes just to answer around how you felt this session went today and how we can improve it further for the future workshops that we will hold. So if there are no more questions today that need answering, I'd just like to thank you for your time today for this webinar and ask you that you spend just a couple of minutes giving us some feedback around your thoughts for this session. And over the coming few days, we will be sharing links to this Miro board so that you can have access to it into the future. And also we'll send links out for the future workshops that we'll hold around this learning pathway of productivity and lean construction. And those links will also be sent for the other 7 workshops that form part of the learning pathways that we're delivering in association with this. So thank you very much for your time today. My name's been Brett Blake and I work with the Supply Chain Sustainability School and LC International. And if you'd like any further information around the support that we can offer, the training and development that's available with lean thinking in mind, please feel free to reach out and make contact. So thank you very much for your time today on this call, and I look forward to meeting and working with you again on future workshops. Thank you very much.